Right, here we go. Shannon Boschy, Chartered Investment Manager, Certified Financial Planner. I have a degree in Fine Arts from the University of British Columbia. Why am I running for school board trustee? Well, I'm 51 years old, and my kids are grown and gone. And I've been involved in communities that I've lived in for many years. And I began digging into an issue last year related to family health. And as a consequence of that, I went down a rabbit hole. And we talk lots and lots about information bubbles these days, and we talk a lot about polarization, and uh, we talk about these rabbit holes, and lots of people go down rabbit holes. And I'm a professional financial analyst and financial planner. I'm a fiduciary. A fiduciary means I have a legal obligation to advise my clients and people I work with in their best interest and to act with the utmost levels of integrity at all times. I've been in this business for 20 years. I've been the treasurer of a charitable foundation that built a $10 million community center. I worked on a seniors housing committee to support age in place and seniors accessible living in the community that I lived in. That went on to build a 30 plus unit facility. Now, this is a small community of only 3,000 people, so that was that was an important project, and it was fairly close and neighborly in how we worked together to do it. I coached soccer for my kids. I was age group coordinator. I Up until my youngest was probably 15. I went to every parent, teacher, and school play that there was. Now, recently, I went on a trip across Canada, and I've been following this education issue for a while. So I met with some school trustees that I know in British Columbia, and one of them is a traditional knowledge keeper, an elder from Cowichan Nation, and he's informing Indigenous inclusive curriculum for the whole province of British Columbia. He's on a small working group for that project, and I've known Joe for 25 years. I was fortunate, very fortunate to meet Joe because I was going through trauma recovery, and I found myself in what I think is fair to describe as a healing circle with a cohort of about 65 or 70 people. About a third of those people were Indigenous survivors of residential schools, and I've heard the stories firsthand from um, dozens of survivors of residential schools. And I have open and ongoing communication with a good friend of mine, another knowledge keeper and storyteller, who's a nephew of one of the only treaty negotiators in living memory between the federal government and an Indigenous nation. Um, because of that process that I went through, and sharing my own trauma recovery, I went on a path and I wrote my undergraduate thesis on a major standoff between our CMP and Indigenous people in 1995, Gustafson Lake. And I spent a year traveling through Western Canada. Okay, so I spent a year studying the issue. I spent about 7 weeks traveling through Western Canada and the United States, through BC, Alberta, Montana, Idaho, Utah, and into Arizona. And I was a sidekick on this journey. Okay, I was only in my mid 20s, um, and as a sidekick in this on this medicine journey, I was privileged to sit and in ceremony and exchange of prayers between um, knowledge keepers and people of Earth tradition. The man I was traveling with was Dutch Maori, uh, and having hereditary blood. And so I was very privileged and humbled by that process. And I wrote my undergraduate thesis on the Gustafson Lake standoff. And um, it's available if you want to look it up on my YouTube channel. There's no visuals to go with it. I read it as an audio, and you can listen to it, and you can tell me what you think. I have studied religion and wisdom tradition and philosophy for 30 years, global religions. And I'm the child of something like an army brat. My father was a mining engineer. I have lived outside of Canada, and I've lived in 5 of 10 provinces. I have experienced racism and violence associated with cultural bias in my lifetime. I was almost killed over an identity group issue when I was 4 years old, because a child was taught to hate. Vous êtes anglais. I lived in Sept-Îles, Quebec. My father was a mining engineer, and our neighbors were uh, anti-Anglo French separatists, and they taught their kid to hate. And their kid left me in a swamp to die and went home for dinner. I was up to my neck in frozen water I'd fallen into and couldn't get out. This was in the spring in Seven Islands, Quebec, on the St. Lawrence River. Want to know what hate is like, what it feels like? I can tell you. But you wouldn't know it because I'm a white guy, and I couldn't possibly have experienced anything like violence to do with my identity before. I think there are better ways to do things. Today, there was some interesting news out of Hamilton. Okay, so I was in British Columbia. I met with a number of school trustees. I met with uh, uh, Joe, who's a Cowichan elder and school trustee in the Cowichan district on Vancouver Island. And I met with two of the leading voices of criticism of SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity curriculum, that was brought in by a consulting company from outside that has nothing to do with education whatsoever. None of the people behind it have anything to do with education. They are people worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and they have money behind them, and they developed a curriculum. Now, it looks like a charity. It seems like the intention is good, but this set of policies was implemented in British Columbia under a snow job. Okay, it was fluffed up to be all of this wonderful glitter and love and inclusion, and there was no underlying analysis of the psychological impact on children. There's been none of these studies to determine whether affirming a dissociated identity for a 6-year-old by its school is a psychologically good thing to do. Human beings, if we have a spirit, we were born to be in a body, not separate from it. And the concept of gender is a metaphysical concept. People have gender dysphoria. I'm friends with Erin Kimberly, who is the head of GD Alliance International. It's an international organization. People associated with it, Buck Angel, for example. Buck Angel is a trans man who transitioned well more than 20 years ago. I want to say it's closer to 30 years ago, and has been on hormone supplements for that length of time. He talks about some of the health complications that have gone along with his transition and some of his experience as, he calls himself Trampa. He's one of the oldest people who undertook, as a woman transitioning to man, one of the oldest living people to have undertaken that. And he and my friend Erin Kimberly, another trans man, who speaks about his transition and the reasons behind it, and experience of gender dysphoria as a child. And many other trans people are expressing concerns about what we're teaching in school. I am not alone. And we haven't had the conversation as a public. These curriculum fed to the school system by consulting companies were slid in under the anti-bullying curriculum, and they faced, as such, didn't face anywhere near the level of scrutiny that we would normally give in good faith. Let's have a public discussion about sexual education in schools, right? Let's have and I remember in the late 70s being in school in Ontario and hearing the debate and argument over sexual education in school. And I was coming up on grade 5 in a couple of years. I remember that conversation. It's an important conversation to have, to air out questions and concerns and flesh those things out. But what has happened with SOGI is that it has slipped under the public radar. And I'm not going to assign any agency to that. But let's just say, to be charitable, well-intentioned people wanted to create something that they could feel good about. They just got it wrong. And that the numbers that we're seeing of trans people, so a Pew Research study, Pew is a very well-known and reputable polling and analysis company. Pew Research study just in the last 10 days says that 5% or 1 in 20 people under the age of 30 are identifying as trans, non-binary, or some gender non-conforming. And okay, that's an interesting number. I'll take that. 1 in 20 is identifying as trans. At the same time, in the age group over 50, only 1 in 333 people are identifying as gender nonconforming. So there's some questions around this. How is this, if we are actually liberating children to be themselves the way they were always supposed to be, and we're just taking away the lifelong inhibitions and stigma, and we've created that environment where that's acceptable, why do we not have more people over the age of 50 who are coming out as trans, who don't understand this? There are serious questions here. So I'm running for school board, partly because I tried to ask questions. I was alienated from my child. And this is routine in our schools. It's routine in Ottawa schools. It's routine in schools all over North America. That schools have decided as agents of the state, because if you're a teacher and you're watching this, you're paid by taxpayer dollars. You are a state institution. And in the schools, we have policies of keeping gender non-conforming or trans-identified conversations away from parents. So kids starts to ask questions about gender. Maybe they've heard something online. Maybe they've seen the genderbread person in school, right? This conversation is starting at 6 years old in our schools about gender being a social construct. It's starting in first grade. And kids are easily confused at that stage. They believe in Batman. They believe that they can be they can fly, or they're going to pretend they're an airplane, and they're trying on different identities. It's a natural part of psychological development at that stage. But when an institution starts to concretize and affirm an identity, the question is, what kind of psychological impact or what kind of psychological priming is this? And then we have rules that say you're not allowed to question it. So you can't question it. So it comes up and then you're not allowed to question it, even if like 10 minutes before the kid was pretending that they were an airplane. This is a concern. Does this concretize an identity in a child? And then we're on a train here in Canada. Moves on to puberty blockers, appointments with the CHEO Gender Clinic that's seen a 2,000% increase in kids presenting for transition in the last 8 years. That's right from CHEO. When I was studying abnormal psychology in university, the numbers for transgender men transitioning to women, so it's trans women. This is all very confusing. Trans women, people who are biological male, socially transitioning and then undertaking experimental medical procedures. By the way, they still are experimental. Undertaking that to resolve the gender dysphoria. And my friends who are trans, well, I want to put words in their mouths. but they still cope with gender dysphoria, even though they've transitioned. So the numbers were about 1 in 10,000. And I had an exchange with Dr. James Cantor online recently, just a short Twitter exchange. I asked him some questions, and he was gracious enough to give me brief answers on this. But he said about 1 in 5,000. So that's about 0.02% of the population up until about 20 years ago. And now we're seeing 1 in 20. So maybe it's more socially acceptable because like 1 in 333 adults over 50 is identifying as gender nonconforming, whereas a while ago it was 1 in 5,000. So maybe something's going on. Maybe there is some sort of liberation. I don't know. But everything to do with the subject matter is censored. Any questions whatsoever about trans and trans identity, it's kept secret. Teachers and schools keep it secret from parents, and they impose a psychological intervention on kids without the parents' knowledge. The last time we did that as a society, as a country, was the residential schools. If you recall, I heard dozens of stories from survivors of residential schools. What happened at residential schools happens when the state decides it knows better than the traditional parents. And that's what's happening to our kids right now in school. There is never an excuse for teachers and administrators in a school to collude with children to keep medical and psychological information from the parents. The state does not own the children. They are not the parents of the children. They don't have anywhere near the investment of actual parents in the lives of their kids. Okay, so I met with the special advisor to the Premier of Alberta for Education in Calgary. And I have his contact information. We had several brief conversations over a weekend. I did incidentally meet Jason Kenney. I'm not a conservative, and I am a big, big critic of Jason Kenney in terms of policy. And you know, I talked with school teachers and professors and all kinds of people relevant to the issue of me running for school board trustee. I've been following the politics of the Toronto School Board. I've been following the politics of the Waterloo District School Board, Scott Piakowski, and the Hamilton School Board. Big news breaking in Hamilton today because an activist from British Columbia had sent an email to all the trustees with photographs, screen grabs, I guess, of pages from books depicting gay oral sex between an adult and a minor, cartoon, and several other images of the like. You can imagine. The one of the trustees was incensed, felt that it was probably illegal to send these images via email, and that the person sending them should be investigated. And as it turns out, the K-6 libraries were stocking all of these books. That's what happened in Hamilton today. And so the trustees have egg all over the face. The last thing I heard a couple of hours ago was that the books were being pulled. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's a long documented email chain of people chirping in on this. The Hamilton, not the Hamilton, the Waterloo District School Board incident with teacher Ms. Burkowski. I'm very sorry. Carolyn Brajowski, who attempted to read the content and present the content of those same books to the school trustees of the Waterloo District. The teacher was silenced. She was accused of violating the Ontario Human Rights Charter and the human rights laws for criticizing, or because she wasn't criticizing, she was reading from passages from these same books that are in the K-6 libraries. And the chair of the board shut down her delegation, her presentation, accused her of violating and treading into human rights territory, and that she was breaking the law. He then censored the videos of this that were put up online. He accused someone who'd recorded it of copyright infringement when it's a public domain document. Technically, the copyright is there, but this is public information. And then set about to investigate Carolyn Boschy as a teacher, having her suspended from school. She's currently suing the Waterloo District for $1.7 million for defamation. And these are the same books that she was raising and presenting to the school boards. Now, this is where it gets interesting. And this is, look, all of this is why I'm running, okay? But what Boschy did was to raise awareness against censorship by an institution, that you can't ask questions. And this is what's going on with the trans issue. They're keeping secrets from parents, and you're not allowed to ask questions. Well, when has a government ever done that and that been okay? They're alienating, or they're coming between parents and children and keeping secrets. Adults colluding with children and telling them it's okay to keep secrets. What does that sound like to you? Those books are in our Ottawa schools, I guarantee you. We haven't had the resources to bring it into this district yet, but we're going to pull those books and we're going to find out which schools have them, and we're going to hold them up to the trustees. And it's going to be in the election. It's going to be in the public campaign. I have national media on this conversation. I have writers for large national media outlets who will write about this conversation that we're going to have in this trustee election, because I'm going to make that conversation happen. The last time we did this, that we felt that the state and the schools knew better than parents, and we usurped authority from parents, and we kept a line and we inserted ourselves between kids and parents, was the residential schools.